According to a newspaper, the British government is planning tax increases in view of the budget deficit and a rising interest burden. Finance Minister Rishi Sunak will disclose the plan on Wednesday when the budget is presented, the Times reported on Sunday. A further £6 billion should flow into the Treasury via a higher income tax. There is a gap of £40 billion there. Sunak had previously announced that it would give companies an additional £5 billion due to the corona pandemic. The money is to help bridge the time until the planned end of the lockdown in the summer. The government in London has spent £280 billion this year alone in the fight against corona, among other things. Sunak announced on Saturday that he would speak clearly with the population about the burden on public finances. These are now vulnerable, he told the Financial Times. An increase in the interest burden by 1 percentage point would increase the cost of debt repayment for the state by £25 billion. That is why he wanted to speak openly with the people about public finances on Wednesday and about plans to master this challenge. In the past few days, government bond yields have risen around the world. Rising bond yields mean higher financing costs for states and companies. To support the economy in the corona crisis, the British government wants to set up a state bank for infrastructure projects worth billions. Finance Minister Rishi Sunak will officially present this project as well on Wednesday as part of the draft budget his ministry announced on Saturday in London. The bank will be founded in the spring with a capital of £12 billion, that's 13.8 billion euros. In addition, according to the information, there are government guarantees amounting to £10 billion. The bank could thus fund infrastructure projects with a total volume of more than £40 billion, for example, in the areas of transport and renewable energies. The Treasury Department emphasized that the projects could stimulate the economy and at the same time contribute to the implementation of the goal of making the UK economy climate neutral. It is about creating infrastructure and jobs worthy of the 21st century, they said. The draft budget, which will be presented on Wednesday, is the first since Britain left the customs union and the single market of the European Union. The United Kingdom is one of the countries hardest hit by the corona pandemic in the world. More than 122,000 people died there after being infected with the coronavirus. The country's gross domestic product shrank by a record 9.9% last year. The new corona lockdown in the UK, which has been in force since the beginning of January, is to be gradually lifted between March and June 21st. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced for June that he would like to model the New Deal launched by US President Franklin D. Roosevelt in response to the Great Depression and invest heavily in the British economy and stimulate the infrastructure again. A comforting new project aims to cheer up the residents of London in these harsh lockdown times. The US artist Leo Villarreal is currently illuminating the bridges of the British metropolis one after the other in a colorful and an individual way. The Thames should run through the corona night like a beautifully illuminated ribbon, with bridges and pillars as elements of a constantly changing work of art. But scoffers are already asking whether this lighting would still work underwater, if everything that spans the Thames is about to plop down into the depths. In fact, many bridges in London have reached the limit of their capacity. They were never built for the volume of traffic they have to cope with today. In the wake of advancing climate change, hotter summers have also attacked the building fabric. And in many places, necessary repairs have been postponed. especially since David Cameron's austerity policy after 2010 led to the community coffers emptying every year. In the meantime, there are more and more cases in which prohibition signs suddenly appearing prevent people from driving on bridges or even just walking on bridges. Last year, both London Bridge and Vauxhall Bridge were closed for immediate repair work. Vauxhall Bridge is in extremely poor condition, civil engineers complained. At Tower Bridge, the most famous of all bridges, one day the wheels jammed and the raised deck could no longer be lowered. For a short time, there really was chaos on site. According to the BBC, a number of bridges are showing the first signs of worrying wear, even if, as the broadcaster quickly adds, one does not have to fear the worst right away. Chiswick Bridge and Westminster Bridge, the bridge in front of Parliament, are also on the list of the problem children. One bridge, the historic Hammersmith Bridge in West London, has meanwhile become the epitome of the bridge misery on the Thames. The beautiful cast iron bridge from the Victorian era that has kept traffic rolling in this part of town since 1887 has literally become unusable, and probably for years to come. The alarm was first raised in April 2019 when dangerous cracks were discovered in the structure. A detailed investigation was then ordered. No motorized traffic was allowed on Hammersmith Bridge afterwards. In the summer of last year, after 2 heat waves, concerns grew to such an extent that pedestrians and cyclists were prevented from crossings as well. Not even the rowing boats that usually frolic in this section of the river are now allowed to approach the bridge or even pass under it. Security guards keep everyone away from the bridge around the clock. The total traffic stop at this strategically important crossing, however, has led to enormous problems. It brutally severed the south bank of the bridge, the parish of Barnes, from the commercial heart of that part of West London, Hammersmith. As there is no subway station in Barnes, there's only a long detour over one of the other bridges to the shops, schools, and hospitals across the river. The way to school alone has become a daily ordeal for many families. For older people who have their doctor or their supermarket over there, a taxi ride is an expensive pleasure, and bus travel with multiple changes at the current COVID time is pure torture. According to the latest calculations, it could take 6 years before the bridge is repaired. Considerations have already been given to demolishing the bridge and replacing it with a new one. But the fact that Hammersmith Bridge is a listed building speaks against it, and the construction of a new bridge would also take several years and would not be much cheaper than maintaining the current structure. Now one wants to try to set up a ferry connection between Hammersmith and Barnes in the spring, which is not an easy endeavor either, as the Thames has strong tides and the river level can sometimes drop sharply. Financial issues and responsibility are also a problem. The Hammersmith and Fulham town councils have been responsible for Hammersmith Bridge since Margaret Thatcher's defeat of the Greater London administration in the 1980s. But it doesn't have the money for such a mammoth repair, because the approximately £140 million that are estimated for it corresponds pretty much exactly to the total annual budget of the municipality. Hammersmith and Fulham cannot simply cut its community welfare, social work, free school meals, housing subsidies, or patrols on the streets just to pay for the bridge, said Stephen Cowan, head of a Labour administration. The Tory government, on the other hand, insists that the local council take on at least half of the bill and, if necessary, raise local taxes significantly. Hammersmith Town Hall believes that the bridge repair could cost the equivalent of pounds extra a year for every taxpayer in the community. It is undoubtedly true that there are structural problems with this bridge, said London's most prominent transport expert, Professor Tony Travis of the London School of Economics, the LSE. But there are obviously structural problems with bridge supervision, with government responsibility, with politics. Instead of a single authority, there are all sorts of different responsible persons along the Thames. Individual districts such as Hammersmith are affected, but also the transport companies assigned to the London City Council. Then there is the so-called Bridge House Estate, a City of London property holder who has been responsible for the bridges in this self-governing district of the capital since 1282 and who used to levy bridge tariffs. Ironically, now that Hammersmith Bridge is being debated, there is again talk of the levying of bridge tariffs. One on the Thames is deeply ashamed that the Hammersmith debacle is now stirring up memories from long times past. London Bridge is Falling Down is a song that is part of the national heritage here and that every child in England knows from kindergarten. The song is said to be derived from the days when London Bridge was the only road link over the Thames, but caught fire several times and began to crumble again and again due to reasons of age. Now, an old fear of Londoners seems to be real, the New York Times recently warned while looking across the Atlantic. London's bridges are really falling down. The more obvious the problem that presents itself on the Thames, the more Londoners shake their heads at their Prime Minister, who during this time as mayor of the city showed little interest in the state of this part of the local infrastructure. Instead, Boris Johnson drew up a great plan for a dashing garden bridge over the Thames, which in the end never came about, but the planning of which devoured the equivalent of 53 million euros in public money. And because of Brexit, many financial service providers have withdrawn their employees from London. In the meantime, the British capital has been replaced by Amsterdam as the largest stock market for European stocks, for example. But an expert is now warning against writing off Great Britain entirely in this regard. Despite ambiguities in the Brexit agreement with the EU, an expert warns against writing off the UK as a financial centre. Despite Brexit, London remains one of the most important global financial centres, says Frank Eich, a former advisor to the British Central Bank. In the Western Hemisphere, only New York, like London, offers a breadth and depth of specialist knowledge and skills, such as insurance, investment banking, legal services, venture capital, or fintechs. The British capital lacks the large US market. In return, London is probably more diverse, for example, a leader in the Islamic financial world, and more internationally focused. The Brexit, which was concluded at the beginning of the year, is putting the EU under pressure to increasingly handle specialized financial services previously provided in London within the community, and that includes clearing. Because of Brexit, numerous institutes have moved thousands of employees from London to EU cities such as Frankfurt, Paris, or Dublin. By March, London and Brussels want to agree on the mutual recognition of standards, called equivalence. With Brexit, British financial service providers lost their passport rights, which enabled them to operate in the EU internal market without additional regulatory approval. Therefore, British companies either have to meet the regulatory requirements of each individual EU member state or rely on the EU to judge the British regulatory framework as equivalent. Most recently, London was ousted by Amsterdam, as I said, as the largest stock market for European stocks. Since European investors were no longer able to trade shares on the London Stock Exchange without a financial service agreement between the UK and the EU, trading activities had to be relocated to an EU member state said Eich, who now works for the management consultancy Economic Sense and former Central Bank of London. The development was inevitable. However, there's more to a financial market than just trading stocks on an electronic platform. British Central Bank Governor Andrew Bailey recently warned the EU that it would have to pay a heavy price if it wanted to cut London off. It's an exaggeration, but it's only about clearing. While many countries such as Germany are complaining about vaccination campaigns that have got off to a slow start, there are constant reports of success from Great Britain on the progress of the corona vaccinations. As a result, the pound has appreciated significantly against other currencies, such as the euro, since the beginning of the year. It is sometimes forgotten that the United Kingdom is one of the countries hardest hit by the pandemic, and that the economy will be massively affected by lockdown and Brexit. Most currency analysts therefore expect the pound to depreciate over the next few months, and some experts even anticipate a violent counter-movement following the recent gains. The market is currently completely hiding economic realities, explains Sonja Martin, head of foreign exchange research at DZ Bank. Regardless of the successful vaccination campaign, the UK will initially fall into another recession and then not recover dynamically in the current year, in contrast to the EU or the USA, for example. We are sticking to our assessment that the pound is significantly overvalued at current rates, says Martin. The DZ Bank is only expecting a plus of 2% for the British GDP for 2021, and not until 2022 with a clearer recovery. For comparison, the growth forecast for the Eurozone for 2021 is 3.7%. For the USA, it is 6%. Although London and Brussels agreed on a free trade agreement at the last minute at the end of 2020, there have been numerous trade barriers since the beginning of the year. We assume that the very weak economic data we expected for the first quarter will bring the market back down to earth, says Martin. In the middle of the week, at times only 87p had to be paid for €1. By consensus, the foreign exchange analysts expect a depreciation to £0.89 over the next 6 months. The experts at DZ Bank anticipate much more substantial losses and exchange rates of 92p in 6 and 95p per euro in 12 months. Investors who want to bet on a pound that is weaker against the euro can choose a knockout certificate from Goldman Sachs, which tracks the exchange rate development with a leverage of currently 3.8. If, contrary to expectations, the pound should continue to gain in value, there will be correspondingly large losses. The barrier that threatens total loss is currently around 26%. And if you want to stay informed, please subscribe to my channel and to my other channels. I'll see you in my next video. Auf Wiedersehen.